Bismillah. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Let me just adjust this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So, can everyone hear me okay from the back too? Okay. So, today's discussion, today's talk is on the story of Qaroon. And this is a tale of riches to ruin. And the story of Qaroon appears in Surah Qasas. And in fact, this is the last couple of ayat in Surah Qasas that talk about the story of Qaroon. And I was reading through this previously in the Quran, and what stood out to me, and just a reminder to me and everyone, that the story of Qaroon, just like the other stories in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings them to us as a reminder, because the lessons are relevant today just as they were at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when the Quran was revealed, and just as they were as they played out if there are stories that happen in history. So that relevance never leaves us, because the book, this Quran, is for all times, and it's for all people and places. And there's so many lessons in the short few ayat. I believe I'm going to cover maybe 4 or 5 ayat. And there's so many lessons to be derived from each ayah. So the way that I'll set it up is I'll go through ayah by ayah, and I'll talk about the specific lessons pertaining to the story at that time, and I'll keep moving through. And from among the lessons that can be learned from this story is having humility. What does humility mean as a believer? What does it mean to have shukr and gratitude to Allah, to be grateful to Allah? And what's the importance? Why is it important to call others to the truth, to the haqq, which is part and parcel of our mission as believers? So with that, I'll begin with the first ayah, and we'll take it from there. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن قارون كان من قوم موسى فبغى عليهم وآتيناه من الكنوز ما إن مفاتحه لتنوء بالعصبة أولي القوة إذ قال له قومه لا تقرح إن الله لا يحب الفرحين. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the translation of the meaning, Qaroon was one of the people of Musa alayhi salam, but he oppressed them. We had given him such treasures that even the keys would have weighed down a whole company of strong men. His people said to him, do not gloat. Allah does not like the people who gloat. So right away we're introduced to this character named Qaroon. And we're told that he's from the people of Musa alayhi salam. Although we're not told if he actually lived at the time of Musa alayhi salam, or if he was from the descendants of the people of Musa alayhi salam. That part is not exactly clear in the Quran. And right away when we're introduced to Qaroon, the next description that we're given is that he oppressed the people. So there's a man named Qaroon who's related to, in a sense, related to the Prophet. He's mentioned along with the name of a Prophet, alayhi salam. But at the same time, the next part says that he oppressed. So he's known automatically. Imagine we're introduced with such a description. None of us would want to be introduced like that if we were going for a presentation, or we're invited somewhere, or we're going for a talk, or we have a presentation in class. None of us would want that type of description. but Qaroon is automatically associated with that. And automatically we learn that being associated with or being from among the people of the righteous doesn't necessarily make us the righteous. And it doesn't matter if I'm from a noble lineage, if I myself am disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or I myself don't care for His commands or just we're defiant. And we realize also that he's amongst righteous people, right? It's not that he's an evil people in an evil society, he's amongst righteous people. And so I want to ask a question. When you think of enormous wealth, what do you think of? What comes to your mind today when you think of enormous wealth? Elon Musk, right? Elon Musk is mentioned. Yep. A yacht, having belongings, amazing belongings and things like that. So we know Jeff Bezos too. So there's people in our time that are known to be multi-billionaires. I don't even know how much their net worth is right now. So that's what we think of wealth in our day and age, right? But to think that the wealth of Qaroon is different from all of these things. MashaAllah, we have strong people in this gathering, in this audience. Imagine it took many strong people to even lift the keys that would open the door that would lead to the wealth of Qaroon. Many strong people to even lift the keys and to turn the keys. That's how much wealth he had. And when we think about wealth sometimes, and sometimes there's depictions of large piles of gold. Imagine, large piles of gold. Sometimes we see it even in fiction, right? And usually it's being guarded by a creature or a dragon. That's what we think of when we think of piles of wealth and gold. So imagine his wealth was almost unimaginable. And when you're in those rooms, how are you going to start to count how much gold is there or what's there or even know yourself? Perhaps Qaroon himself didn't even know how much he accumulated. And for us as believers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made hoarding forbidden to us. And I want to go into the definition of hoarding, because hoarding wealth is wealth that accumulates indefinitely. Meaning that you have money that just keeps increasing without any purpose. It's not that you're saving up for something, even be it a necessity or something that you need, even be it a car or a home, or saving up for your tuition to go to college. That's okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made saving allowed. But hoarding is the indefinite increase of wealth just for the sake of accumulation of wealth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His mercy, has allowed us to obtain wealth and seek it, to meet our minimum needs, meaning food, shelter, water, clothing, these type of things. But beyond our minimum needs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also allowed us to seek some of the luxuries. What are luxuries? Simply, luxuries are defined as that which is beyond your minimum needs, right? Technically, you only need, let's say you need 2 garments. One you wear, one you wash, and you switch. Technically, minimally, that's what you would need. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to seek more, right? So it's not that you can't obtain luxuries, but hoarding is completely different, as I mentioned earlier. And we're not told exactly what the oppression of Qaroon was, but automatically we're told about his wealth, giving us the understanding that whatever oppression he was carrying out was also linked to his wealth. And the thing about hoarding is that when you keep treasures locked away, where is that money not going? Into the society. That money is not going into the society. So when you lock away wealth, all that money that should be distributing and circulating within the economy, all of that's not helping anybody. So that's some of the ramifications. Like a person hoarding wealth doesn't only hurt that person from the perspective of punishment from Allah, but it hurts the entire society. And this is one of the vices of Qaroon. And if you think about the predominant system today, the economic system, you guys know what it is, capitalism. It encourages the haves and the have-nots to accumulate wealth because there's a limited, they would say in capitalist theory that there's a limited amount of resources and there's an unlimited amounts of needs and wants. And somebody will be left out. So have at it. Try to accumulate as much as you can. Somebody will be left out of that context, right? And there's much more to say on this topic, but for the sake of the discussion, I'll keep that side of it brief. And we're given a glimpse of Qaroon's vices. His people notice that he's lost the right path. And he's lost himself in so much wealth. And they advise him, don't obsess over this wealth and this apparent success. Don't take so much pride in your treasures, forgetting that the only reason you've made it this far is because by the permission of Allah, Allah granted you these things. That's why. So don't be so prideful and happy about yourself and your situation while you forget Allah, the one who gave you that very wealth, who allowed you to acquire it. And what's also amazing here is that the people that are surrounding Qaroon, they remind him of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to stay clear of the path that angers Allah. And if we contrast that with today, how many times, be it friends or family members, how many times do we see people in our society, in our community, they go the wrong way? Maybe they're indulging in a business that's receiving haram profits. Or maybe they're known to have free mixing between men and women openly to the point where there's friendship and they're just going about it and doing things that they're not supposed to be doing outside of marriage. So no matter what that topic is, when nobody talks about it, when nobody holds each other to account, what happens? That thing becomes normalized in the society. And unfortunately, we see that today with a lot of ills of our society, and a lot of sins that are rampant even in our community. May Allah protect us. But the amazing thing about the people of Qaroon, remember I mentioned that he was in a society that was known to have people that were righteous. They stop and they don't just let Qaroon do as he does, despite his wealth, despite his status. But they remind him, don't gloat over this wealth. Don't take so much pride over this wealth, because you're going the wrong way with it. And then the ayat continue. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وابتغي فيما آتاك الله الدار الآخرة ولا تنس نصيبك من الدنيا وأحسن كما أحسن الله إليك ولا تبغي الفساد في الأرض إن الله لا يحب المفسدين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, seek the life to come by means of what Allah has granted you, but do not be neglectful of your rightful share in this world. Do good to others as Allah has done good to you. Do not seek to spread corruption in the land, for Allah does not love those who do this, who spread corruption. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala automatically frames wealth and the acquisition of wealth in the context, in the proper context that it should be in, which is keeping the final abode in mind, to keep that afterlife, to keep that Jannah in mind. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says right away, seek the life to come by the means of what Allah has granted you. Do not be neglectful to your rightful share in this world, right? So seek the life to come. Allah reminds us, don't be caught with the delusions of this world, of the shininess of the things that are around us. Remember where you're headed. Remember where you're going. And seek provisions for that life. And provisions, I don't want to make wealth in and of itself seem like a bad thing. Because the man, for example, who spends for his family, and who goes to a job with the intention of spending on his family and to take care of their needs, that's rewarded in the sight of Allah. That's a righteous thing in the sight of Allah. or the one who sacrifices his wealth, who gives sadaqah, who helps his brother in need, who helps his sister in need. In that time, that person who helps the ummah, that person is also using their wealth for that which is good. And even if you spend on the things that Allah has made halal, that's also okay and good things to spend on. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs us to live a life of balance. In Islam, we're taught that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that we're not supposed to relinquish everything. We're not supposed to purposely wear the worst of clothes, or to have the lowest of means on purpose, or to relinquish these aspects of the dunya. That's not what Allah instructs us. On the other hand, Allah instructs us not to be obsessed with wealth, not to make that the purpose of our lives and why we live and why we wake up day to day. So Islam gives us a balance, and we're allowed to seek more beyond our basic needs. And we're allowed to enjoy the bounties, the things Allah has made halal for us. Even the halal food that's out there, we're allowed to enjoy it. We're allowed to enjoy the things that we have, that Allah has given us. Why? Because with that proper mindset, we're reminded that who gave me these things? Who gave me my family? Because provisions don't come only in the form of money. But who gave me my family? Who gave me the things that I have? Who gave me the wealth that I have? Who gave me the hands and the feet? Who gave me the mind that allows me to go and seek it? It's none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we keep this in mind, even doing things that are quote unquote for the dunya become for the sake of Allah, with the consciousness and mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how Muslims bridge the gap between that which is material and being cognizant and recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so wealth is such a thing, and money and provisions are such a thing, that they can do two things for us. They can either take us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as I just mentioned, or when we open up with the example of some of the famous non-Muslims today who are known for having billions in wealth, right? Despite their status, despite being disbelievers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still grants them with provisions. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His mercy, in His amazing bounties and blessings, He grants wealth even to those that disobey Him. In a recent tweet, I don't know if you're familiar with a recent tweet with Elon Musk, and how he mentions that even if there's a hell, I'm okay going there, because majority of people will be there anyway. So he comes with a mocking attitude or an arrogance that he's saying that even if there is a life after death, I'm okay with the worst of it. He's saying that now with his tongue that's in this dunya. But on that day, the limbs will be made to speak, and he will not be in control on that day. And his actions will speak for themselves. And even in Surah Ghashiyah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or let me back up, but so if you think about it, whatever experience we have in this life, whatever luxury, whatever scenes that we go see to visit, for example, if you guys are familiar with hiking and going to places of nature, and you're in awe when you look at the magnificent sky, or you look at the trees, especially in the fall time, and you're in awe of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even when you do that, that reminds you of the blessings of Allah and all of the luxuries that you experience in this life. Another reason why I was thinking about this, why it's okay to experience these things and remember Allah, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes luxuries in Jannah. And if we didn't have a taste of that in this life, how would we appreciate what's waiting for us, inshallah, by the will of Allah in Jannah? How would we appreciate any of that? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in Surah Ghashiyah, in the translation of the meaning, of the believers whose faces will be radiant, will be glowing, shiny, in a lofty garden, describing Jannah, where they will hear no idle talk. Idle talk is just wasteful talking for the sake of it. with the flowing spring, raised up couches, goblets, big, large cups filled with the best drinks you can imagine in front of you, and cushions that are orderly, set in rows, and carpets that are spread out. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He describes Jannah, Jazakallah. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Jannah, He's using descriptions that we understand. When He's talking about a comfortable abode, a comfortable home, when He's talking about raised, comfortable couches, when He's talking about cushions that are laid about, when He's talking about having a drink right in front of you, right? So when we experience these things in the dunya, it should remind us with the right attitude, with the right mentality, take us back to Allah. And in another situation, when we think about how wealth can be a blessing, think about some of the famous companions. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, who was known to free the slaves, including Bilal radiallahu anh, who was one of the greatest Muslims, who was honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know Uthman radiallahu anh, that was known for his wealth. We know Abdurrahman ibn Auf. We know Umar radiallahu anh. So we know these companions that would spend in the way of Allah, fi sabilillah. And fi sabilillah meaning for the campaigns of jihad and spreading the message in the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would fund these campaigns and give their wealth for the sake of Allah. So they're known to give it away for the righteous causes and actions. And that's another reason why wealth in and of itself is not problematic. It's not haram, but it's what you do with it. It's your mindset about it. Continuing on, the ayat. قال إنما أوتيته على علم عندي أولم يعلم أن الله قد أهلك من قبله من القرون من هو أشد منه قوة وأكثر جمعا ولا يسأل عن ذنوبهم المجرمون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, but he answered. So remember previously, Qaroon's people give him advice. Don't go too far with his wealth. Don't be obsessed over it. And you know what he answers back? This wealth that I have, it was given to me because of my knowledge. It was given to me because, in other words, because I earned it. I went out and it was because of me that I have all these bounties. And so they come with the warning of Allah, but he says it was me. It was because of me that I'm here today. It was because of me that I have this status in this world. And I have this fame and I have this wealth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, did he not know that Allah had destroyed many generations before him who had greater power and built up greater wealth? The guilty will not be questioned about their sins. So for the believers, any good that we're capable of, any abilities that Allah has given us, whatever position it may be, some of us are familiar with working with our hands, whether it comes to building things or cleaning things. All of us probably have the understanding of using your hands to clean, keep your house in order, keep things orderly, or working on things with your hands, be that mechanic work or creating things. Obviously not from scratch, but some of us are students right now. We're studying, inshallah, to be in a better place where we can provide for ourselves and for our families and seek sufficiency. Some of us are engineers, or some of us are striving to be engineers, or some of us maybe striving to be doctors. But no matter what position, what station, what rank we achieve in this life, what do we always remember? What should we always remember? How did we get here? Was it only you that woke up one day and had the ability to move, had the ability to think, had the ability to change, to work? Was that only you? Or remembering that it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gave us the ability to even move. He gave us our limbs. He gave us our tongue from which we can speak. He gave us our mind from which we can think. It was Allah. So any bounties we have, any rank that we've achieved in this life, who should be attributed to? To none other than Allah. But Qaroon is not like this. Qaroon actually takes the exact opposite route. And one more thing on that point. How can we claim that our wealth really belongs to us? Yes, Allah gave it to us in our possession today. But the fact of the matter is, even we belong to Allah and we will return to Allah. As we acknowledge many times when we say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, we acknowledge that we belong to Allah and to Him we will return. So how can we say in the ultimate sense that the wealth really belongs to us? No. Allah gave it to us for a short period of time to see what we would do with it in this life. And so for Qaroon, as I mentioned, he takes an exact opposite route. For him, it's ingratitude. His ingratitude to Allah. He doesn't even acknowledge that his wealth is from Allah. Despite living in a community of believers. It's not that he's never heard of this concept. Who is Allah? Right? Is there a creator? He's familiar, and even his people remind him and hold him to account. But despite that, he denies it as if he's never even heard of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As if he never believed in Allah. He never thought of Allah when it mattered. So for Qaroon, he displays his ingratitude. And that ingratitude to Allah is a form of kufr. It's what leads him to disobedience and disbelief. And for Qaroon, his wealth is tied with arrogance. The more he accumulates, the more he becomes forgetful of the one who gave him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the more wealth he accumulates, the more his arrogance rises up. There's a direct relationship between those, right? And for him, his delusions keep increasing. His delusions that he has he's self-prescribed a superiority. And it keeps seeping into his heart and seeping into his mind. And Qaroon is reminded of those who came before him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, there were nations, there were people that came before you. If you think you're wealthy, if you think you're strong, if you think you're famous or the people like you, there were nations and people that came before you. And guess what? They had more wealth than you had today. They had more power than you had today. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed them for their disobedience. So today, if we're enamored or we look up to the people that are rich and famous today, that have enormous sums of wealth, the message for them today that are disobedient to Allah is the same message to Qaroon. There were people that came before you that had more than you. Look at what happened to them. Will you not take warning? Are you not going to take a warning? And remember your Creator, remember your Lord that gave you the ability to be who you are today? Are you not going to remember many chances Allah gives us in our lives? And what do some of them say? If there's a hell, I'm okay with going there because most people will be there anyway. Think about ingratitude. And think about ingratitude even from the perspective and arrogance in the perspective of Shaitan, who refused to bow to Adam alayhi salam at the command of Allah because he said that he's made of clay and you made me of fire. So why would Shaitan creates his own morality. He creates his own rankings in spite of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him. And he's defiant too in his arrogance. And that's what Qaroon is going through right now. And it's a lesson for us today too. And then the ayat continue. فَخَرَجَ عَلَىٰ قَوْمِهِ فِي زِينَتِهِ قَالَ الَّذِينَ يُرِيدُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا يا ليت لنا مثل ما أوتي قارون إنه لذو حظ عظيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, he went out amongst his people in all his pomp. And those whose aim was the life of this world said, if only we had been given something like that Qaroon was given. He really is a very fortunate man. So previously, in the previous scene, we just talked about how Qaroon was warned by his people to turn back to Allah. How does Qaroon respond to this? He comes out to his people, all decked out. He's wearing the best clothes that he has. And you can tell the wealth of a person based on the clothes, especially at that time, right? So he comes out in his best clothes in pomp. What does pomp mean? In arrogance. He comes out with a stride. And despite the warnings from his people, he continues to be in decline and defiance. And as he makes his grand entrance in front of the people, some of the believers at that time, they start to be allured, enamored by the wealth of Qaroon. And they say, if only I had some of the wealth that Qaroon was given. If only I was given some of it. Look how fortunate of a man he is. So some of the believers, upon seeing Qaroon, they forget that Qaroon, he's accumulated his wealth at the expense of the people. And at the disapproval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They forget, because insan is forgetful, right? And we can understand this today because sometimes, whether it's ourselves or it's the people that we might know, sometimes we look to people that might be wealthy in our community. Or they might have the biggest house in the city. Or they might be known for driving the best cars. And when we look to them, sometimes it might come in our heart, that envy might come in our heart, right? That we want some of what they were given at their expense, right? And so we become obsessed with things that we're not supposed to be obsessed about. Not necessarily things that we can't acquire ourselves with gratitude to Allah, but things that we become obsessed about when we look to other people. And so what happens? When you look at these things, sometimes some people take it as their mission. I want to accumulate the wealth of this so-and-so person. I want to become like them by any means necessary, meaning it doesn't matter if you get there in a way that's halal or haram. It doesn't matter if you get there in a way that's pleasing to Allah or displeasing to Him. Because in your mind, you set yourself on a goal. You've become fixated on something that it's started to dominate your thinking, started to dominate your mind. And then so you want to start putting on an appearance when that happens to you. You want to put on the best clothes and you want to look good in front of the people. You want to look good in front of the people. And some want to become examples of wealth and status. Unfortunately, it happens in our Muslim community. May Allah protect us from it. You want to become that example that people look up to and say, I want to be like that guy. I want to be like Haris. I want to be like this guy in the community that's known for this and this, right? And so what happens to you in that situation is that to gain popularity and approval of the people, you start to go down a path of compromising the deen. And for some, that may look like taking out loans to start a business to get yourself in a place, a loan based on riba, interest, to get yourself to a place of wealth and status. Or it may look like forgetting about the fact that your home or your car, your home might be on a mortgage, or your car may be financed with interest. And you forget about these things because you're in that pursuit, right? And you start to think, your criteria becomes, what will the people say when they see me? How are the people going to react? If they see us driving a Toyota instead of driving a BMW, what are they going to think of me? If I go to the, family events and I go to parties and occasions, what are they going to think about me if I show up in this attire? Or you don't have such and such designer clothing. And you think, what will the people say? And you forget, what will Allah say if you acquire all those things through haram? What will Allah say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about you? And moreover, what will you say when you meet Allah? And you did things for the sake of insan, for the sake of looking cool, or to gain that fame, to gain that clout. What will you say? You'll stand on nothing. And this is a situation Qaroon finds himself in, accumulating wealth, and he can't back any of it up. And it will all be against him and not for him on that day. His mountains of treasure that he keeps locked up will be against him and not for him on that day when he meets Allah. And the thing is that no matter how much of the dunya that we acquire, without the remembrance of Allah, when we forget Allah and when our heart becomes attached to something within the dunya, no matter how much of it we get, our desires are never fulfilled. I like to give this analogy sometimes. If you think about, if you studied chemistry, and you think about volume of a gas in a container, and you know that whatever container you put that gas in, what happens? It expands to the edges of that container, right? It expands throughout that container. So that's like your love for the dunya and things. When you get a better car, you love that car. And in and of itself, that's okay, right? When you upgrade in life, you start to love that car, or you start to love that new house when you move. But slowly, after some time, some days, some months, you start to get used to it. It's almost like that gas expanding in the container. It just becomes whatever. It adapts to whatever it's inside of. And you adapt to that house, and you adapt to that new lifestyle. And that becomes normal to you. And then you seek that which is better, and it becomes a cycle. It becomes a cycle when you're never content. And as believers, it's another lesson for us today that when we look to some of the leading nations in the world today, we know who they are. Some of the superpowers of the world today that are known for their wealth, and they're known for their influence in the land. We're living in one of those countries today, right? When we look to these nations, it's a lesson for us. Allah reminds us, is your wealth, is your status, your sight in the eyes of Allah based on your wealth? Is it? Because when we look at Qaroon, or we look at the nations today, how did they acquire their wealth? Wasn't it through the oppression and subjugation of other nations and countries? Wasn't that wealth acquired through the subjugation of other countries, stealing their wealth, imposing their rules upon that country, taking back their resources? So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that when you look at people with wealth, don't automatically assume that Allah is happy with them, or they're doing something that's correct, and therefore Allah is giving them the provision and giving them the wealth. Don't think that just because certain nations that we talked about are in the superpower position today, whereas yesterday it was the Muslims, right? They're in a superpower position today. Don't think that if we follow their lifestyle, if we follow their ideology, if we follow their morals and the way that they live, that we're gonna now become successful. Because Allah reminds us that success is not due to our wealth. Allah gives and Allah takes. Allah gives and Allah takes. So never take that as a measure for success in and of itself. And then the ayat continue. وَقَالَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ وَيْلَكُمْ ثَوَابُ اللَّهِ خَيْرٌ لِمَنْ آمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَلَا يُلَقَّاهَا إِلَّا الصَّابِرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, but those who are given knowledge said, alas for you, Allah's reward is better for those who believe and do good deeds. Only those who are steadfast will attain this. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us? So in that crowd, remember I talked about how Qaroon comes arrogantly in front of the people, showing off his attire, showing off his wealth. There's some people in that crowd that are fascinated by it. They forget what Qaroon did and they say, I want some of that. But there's other Muslims, believers in that crowd who say, Allah's reward is better for those who believe and do righteous deeds. So they're saying, we know Qaroon has been given these enormous sums of wealth that we can't even count. But Allah has something better for us. Don't get distracted. In other words, they realize that they're not supposed to get distracted by the shiny, by the alluring nature of this dunya. Don't get distracted, right? And these are the believers with sound knowledge. And their hearts don't incline towards flagrant defiance and disobedience to Allah. And we can take more lessons from this incident too. Because today we live in a society and we live in a time and a place where your base desires, animalistic desires, become the guidance for many people. And they start to dictate the morality of a people in the society. And in this society today, we're told, be who you want to be. Go ahead and do what your desires tell you. Go ahead and follow happiness. Doesn't matter what expense that comes with. Be independent. Rely on yourself. Look to yourself. Do what makes you feel right. Don't worry about right and wrong. Don't worry about what these people are telling you, these backwards religious people are telling you. Don't worry about that. Do what makes you feel good in your heart. And even at the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would say that when in referring to the Quran and the Deen, these are stories of the ancient people of the past. In other words, these are not relevant to us today. And similarly today, people come to the Muslims and the believers, and they say, what you're following is backwards. What you're following belongs in the 7th century. It belongs in the past. How come you're against the things that the society pushes today to go and hang out with whoever you want to hang out, date whoever you want to date, have sexual activity with whoever you want to have sexual activity with? Do whatever pleases you, even if that hurts other people. How did we get to this situation? It's because this society threw out the morality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. And it's a lesson today, these believers that are in front of Qaroon that are not impressed. It's a lesson for us today. Don't be pushed by the societal pressure and the things that seem alluring during our time. Don't be pushed into that. Know that you stand for something that's far greater. And we as believers, we must not lose ourselves to the shallow submission to our desires. And if we see something in this dunya that our hearts incline towards, it happens. And for us, many of us sitting over here, men, one of the biggest fitnas for men is women. We know that. We were told this, we were warned about this. And sometimes, even it doesn't matter whether you're married or what age you are, as long as once you hit puberty, it's inside of you to have the attraction for women. Even if you're married, shaitan doesn't leave you alone from that lustful gaze, and that's why we have to guard our eyes and our tongue. And there's zina of the eyes and zina of the tongue and zina of the limbs before there's the actual physical zina. So even for the believing men and the believing women, when our hearts incline to something in the dunya, be it an action, a person, an object, a trend, or a lifestyle, stop in that moment. Stop and think, would Allah be happy if I went after this thing? Would Allah be pleased with me if I waste my time chasing this girl or chasing this thing that's part of my desires, or chasing this haram lifestyle? Would Allah be happy with it? Whenever your heart inclines towards something, use your aql. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the mind. Use that to gauge, is my heart inclining upon something that's halal, something that's good for me, or is it inclining upon something that's haram? And will it benefit me on the day when I'm standing in front of Allah? Will it benefit me on that day? Think about these questions. And we must stop and think what Allah offers us and what these believers are realizing in front of Qaroon. What Allah offers us is far greater than anything this dunya can offer us. Is far greater. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with a deen, with a way of life that distinguishes between haqq and batil. A deen that gives us an objective standard and morality to decipher the world, to navigate the world. We have been given a compass for our hearts and minds. But why do we throw it away when we see things that are Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put tests in front of our eyes? Why do we forget? And so we must remind each other. And this is because as believers, we have to be intelligent. We have to be intelligent as Muslims and not simply go with the ever-changing flows of the society. Today, the society says something is halal for them, which Allah, in the sight of Allah, is haram. And even they deemed it haram years ago or days ago. But we have to be intelligent and not fall into this trap as believers. And then the ayat continue. فَخَسَفْنَا بِهِ وَبِدَارِهِ الْأَرْضَ فَمَا كَانَ لَهُ مِنْ فِئَةٍ يَنْصُرُونَهُ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُنْتَصِرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us what happens to Qaroon. This is a rapid conclusion to the story. We talked about how he was known from the people of Musa. He was known to have enormous wealth that it would take many strong men to lift, to even open the doors to that mountain of wealth. We were told that he was warned by his people. We were told that he came out arrogantly in front of his people. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we caused the earth to swallow him and his home. He had no one to help him against Allah, or could he defend himself? So Qaroon, who thought he would never face account in front of Allah, in an instant, he swallowed. And his mountain of treasure, his home is swallowed with him. And even the believers that were in the gathering that started to look upon Qaroon and wish that they had some of what he had. Allah reminds them, and He reminds us today, don't fall for that distraction. Don't fall for the fitna and the endless cycle of accumulation of wealth for the sake of it and seeking it at the displeasure of Allah. Don't fall for that. And Qaroon, in an instant, when the earth swallows him, his empire of riches that he's accumulated over a lifetime, built upon arrogance and disobedience, is flattened right away. And the earth swallows him. And that's how quickly Allah can change the condition of a people. And He effortlessly destroys everything. And instead of taking heed from previously destroyed generations, remember I mentioned Allah previously in these ayat is reminding us that people came before that were far wealthier than you, far more rich than you, far mightier than you, but they were destroyed. And instead of taking heed, Qaroon goes the other way. And Qaroon is made to be an example for us. Can you imagine that? He was given the example of previous generations, but instead he became an example for us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us that no matter the wealth and power that you have, no matter the wealth and numbers that you have, no matter the armies that you might have, all of it amounts to nothing in front of Allah. It amounts to nothing in front of Allah. And everything in the creation is proved to be weak, powerless, incapable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put that in us. But many of us forget and we neglect that feeling inside of us. That nature Allah has put in our fitrah. We forget and we go down a path of disobedience. Now, in just 2 ayat, I'll go through 2 more ayat and then inshallah I'll conclude and summarize. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the transition of the meaning of the next ayah, the next day, those who had the day before wished to be in his place, in the place of Qaroon. Alas for you, Qaroon. It is God. So they say, alas, it is God alone, it is Allah alone who gives what He wills, abundantly or sparingly, to whichever He will of His creatures. If Allah had not been gracious to us, He would have caused the earth to swallow us too. Alas, indeed, those who deny the truth will never prosper. So the people that were at the gathering and they're reminded and they see Qaroon disappear before their very eyes. They see the miracle in front of them. They say that it is Allah who gives what He wills to whichever of the creatures that He wills. And if Allah hadn't been gracious to us, if Allah had not snapped us out of this reality, if Allah had not reminded us, we would have fallen into this pit. We would have been buried with Qaroon if Allah hadn't reminded us. So these believers, they wake up. And may Allah make us amongst those believers who see, when they see the sign of Allah, they take heed and they wake up. And they don't just dismiss it, thinking that they're free from punishment. And they will walk the earth and nothing will happen to them. And then the ayats continue, and then the final ayah, the transition of the meaning. We grant the home in the hereafter to those who do not seek superiority on the earth or spread corruption. The happy ending is awarded to those who are mindful, who have taqwa. So what is Allah telling us? Allah has prepared something amazing for us. Has prepared something that we can barely imagine. But that's for those that don't seek superiority. What does superiority mean? It doesn't mean trying to, like I mentioned before, it doesn't mean studying, trying to better yourself in this life, even be that materially, with the gratitude to Allah. But it's those like Qaroon and Fir'aun that seek to elevate themselves above the people, that seek to say that they are better than others, whereas we know Allah knows what's in the hearts. Allah knows who's the righteous believer and who is the hypocrite. But these are the people who assert their superiority in whatever means that they know is possible. And in the end, what will not help us in front of Allah is not the admiration of the people. It's not what people will think about us, even when we're long gone. It's not our lineage, whether we come from a noble family or a noble lineage. It's not our wealth, nor is it our status in the eyes of the people, nor the corruption and deviation from the straight path. All of this will hurt us and will not help us in front of Allah. But what will help us in front of Allah when we meet Him on that day is belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's our taqwa. It's our consciousness of Allah as we navigate this dunya. And it's Allah's acceptance of our sacrifices, solely done for His sake and not done for the sake of the people. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us have a good end. Unlike the end of Qaroon and the people that go astray, who lived amongst the believers, but they didn't take heed. And I pray that Allah allows us to achieve His pleasure and grants us that final abode that He describes in many places in the Quran, the final ending for the sincere believers. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeps us away from the arrogance that caused even the worshipper shaitan, Iblis, to deviate and to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may Allah allow us to walk the earth as humble believers, as we're meant to be. And strive to enjoin the good and forbid the evil and help each other out. Because we're not self-sufficient. We are not self-sufficient. And for us, we're ordered to enjoin each other the truth and to call each other to the truth. And may Allah help us in this. And with that, inshallah, I'll conclude the talk. And we can go into the discussion session. And if anybody has any comments and questions, and I'm sure there's aspects that I didn't cover, and then we can inshallah go from there and learn from each other. So